be moderating our panel today. I'd like to welcome Mayor Alan Arakawa, the Mayor of Maui. Welcome.
Good morning.
Colton Ching, the Vice President of Energy Delivery for Hawaiian Electric Company.
Hi, good morning.
And Ned Harvey, Managing Director of Rocky Mountain Institute, responsible for the Carbon War Room.
Thank you.
All right, so the first question I'm going to ask you folks is, I just talked about some of the questions that we ask as we move toward a clean energy future. So what do you think is the most important question that we can ask to help us meet our goals?
So I've talked to our teams that are working on this problem all over the world, and universally the question is, can we bring to bear the level of innovation that's going to be required to make the transition? There's lots of technical questions, there's a lot of stakeholder questions, but nobody's ever done this before. So whoever is in the lead is rewriting the book, and it's about innovation. So how quickly can we rally an innovative spirit and an innovative community that's going to help us get there, and how quickly can we deploy that?
What do you think the question is?
So I think yesterday there was some good discussion around how in Hawaii there's a lot of common views around where our endpoint needs to be, our goals, our endpoints of being at 100% in 2045. So I think for Hawaii, the biggest question we need to ask ourselves and solve for is how do we get there in a way that adapts to all of these uncertainties that we're going to experience in the future, and in that journey of getting there, making sure we're doing in a way, providing energy at a price that meets the needs of all of our customers, all the residents here in Hawaii in a way that supports the state's economy. And we're talking backstage, there's no playbook on that. There's no manual that says, here's how you get there. So our plans really need to strike out sort of a new path, but at the same time making sure we're doing it in the interest of all of us that live here in Hawaii.
So just one simple, small question for you then.
Just one, simple.
Mayor Arakawa?
Well, I think this is probably the most important, one of the more complex questions, because when we're looking at where we need to go, we know that there are going to be a lot of givens that we have today, assumptions that we make that are not going to exist. When we look at what we have to be able to evaluate, we never plan comprehensively where we bring in what's going to happen to our environment. How are we going to plan the roads? Where are we going to plan the water systems? How are we going to be able to put energy to all of these different areas we need to put energy? How are they all going to commingle? At the same time, the entities that we consider locked in concrete today may not be around tomorrow. I've watched HCNS folding their cane fields, Pioneer Mills gone, Molokai Ranch close their ranch, Maui Pine disappear. So I've watched major companies disappear. If Hawaiian Electric had gotten their way, they would have been gone and we would have been NextEra right now. So the entities that we know that exist today cannot be the entities that set the parameters for what we need to have in long-term discussion, because they may all disappear. When we're looking at cost, we talk about avoided cost a lot of times. But what is avoided cost other than a short-term discussion? The costs that were there 5 years ago or 2 years ago and today are very, very different. The cost figures fluctuate so greatly that to have discussions on avoided costs really just muddles up the water, because the real discussion has to be, where do we want to end up if we want to be 100% renewable and we want to be able to protect the environment and we want to be able to provide a future for our children? How are we going to put all of that together into one package so that they work with each other and are not separate entities that are being planned that may not help the other parts of the plan? It's going to have to be very, very comprehensive, and I believe we're approaching it in kind of a mishmash where we're looking at today's challenge and we're not taking a look at 50 and 100 years from now.
Okay, so if I can summarize, I think what you're saying is the question is, do we have the right people and organizations to lead and the right sort of cost structure to make decisions?
We're going to have to really study that and really figure out who should be the leaders, who should be leading this charge. And I'll give you a good example. You know, if NextEra had bought Hawaiian Electric, NextEra had already applied with Hawaiian Homes, I believe, to put up windmills on Maui. Is the electric entity, whatever it is, are they the ones that are going to be the energy producers, or are we going to be exporting that money offshore, or should we be looking at local producers that can keep the money within our community, the jobs within our community? How are we going to frame all of this when we don't know, and we shouldn't be taking for granted that, again, what is here as an entity is going to be here forever?
Thanks. Okay, so I think this actually brings up an important point, and I want to touch on one thing you mentioned, and specifically get some thoughts around talent and how we bring in the best people and expertise to do this. So I think, from my perspective, this has been a huge challenge in how we implement some of the innovation projects we have and how we integrate systems. Every individual technology itself is not a problem. It's the integration of all of this that really creates a challenge. And I'm curious, Ned, if you've seen some examples from other places in the world where we can draw on to figure out how to bring the best talent here.
Absolutely, and I think it gets to a lot of what the mayor was talking about, which is one has to think about the breadth of the talent they need. And in the beginning, having somebody that can come in and independently represent the interests of the community, the island, the mining site we work with, whomever, and to help them build that vision for the future, and not just make it around energy, make it around what is required for the long-term success and health of that community. Whether it's economic development, whether it's keeping the rents of the community in the thing, and to set that vision, and then to put a plan together, and then the technical help is there, the NGO help to come in and do that. So that independent third-party help that isn't representing any one stakeholder is essential. It's possible to build that with internal teams, but quite often it's needed to get from the outside, and that's frankly something we've tried to provide. It was a major shift in what RMI started to do about 5 years ago, which is, yes, everybody's going to perceive us initially as having a stake in the ground and wanting to be about renewables and efficiency, but we had to set that aside and first be about helping that local community achieve its goals, set its goals and achieve its goals. It's got to start there.
Colton, who do you think is a good third-party sort of provider of that? Do you think that's necessary here, and what does that mean for Hawaii?
Yeah, so I agree with Ned that the best team to solve for this isn't going to just be made of only of people who are in Hawaii. I also think it's not going to just be made of people who are from outside of Hawaii, right? That team is going to be a combination of both, where we bring in local knowledge and understanding of the local culture, plus various aspects of expertise from the outside. And I think that combined team is the better team for that. I can list many NGOs as well as government agencies that have already played a huge role here in Hawaii and in other places. And I think those organizations will continue to play an important role here in Hawaii. But when I get asked about, what's going to be the answer for 30 years from now, I keep reminding myself that lawmaker or that engineer or that financing guy or gal who's going to play that important role for us in 2045 may not even be born yet.
Yeah.
Right? It's so far out. So I think we got to think and try to best answer your question, Don, by not looking at what we have today, but trying to imagine where things will be in the future, and just being really open, being almost like a marketing firm here in Hawaii to tell the world what we're committing ourselves to do as a challenge. And rather than going out and searching the world for the right talent to bring here, I think we're going to be far more successful if we give our message out there, and that the talent will come to us to a large extent. And we're, I think, seeing some of that here. I mean, you definitely are seeing it in your organization, but we're also seeing it even at the utility. So I think the more people are aware and understand of what we're trying to commit to do in Hawaii and are striving to accomplish, I think the excitement, the energy, the uncertainty of it all, and the challenge of doing it and solving for it will bring a lot of really good talent knocking on Hawaii's door to help us.
I guess the question that immediately comes to mind, though, is the marketing enough? I mean, what needs to come right behind marketing in order to give people the confidence they can really sink their teeth in and make change here?
I think you need to really understand that there are many countries, especially the Asian countries, that are ahead of us in technology. You know, we've heard yesterday about smart grids and being able to monitor things in the home. There are 40-story buildings in Korea that already do that. There are conferences that are being held internationally, and there are organizations. I just was at Pingtung, Taiwan, and ICLEI was there. They've got about 1,000 members, and their goal is 100% renewables, local government for sustainability. So there are organizations out there that have been doing this for a number of years already. And I think anyone in the industry that works on an international level knows that there are experts that have been working on this for a long time with technology that's advanced to what we have here and systems that we have here. The integration of the different components within the community like Pingtung is doing that. They've put together their flood control.
So why aren't we doing that here? What are the challenges to doing that here?
We're 5 to 10 years behind, and we're locked into an old way of thinking that we are the center of the universe and that others aren't making advances as fast as we are. The reality is we're slowly slipping to second world because the first world countries that were third world countries have moved ahead of us to a large degree in technology. We have the ability, we have the capability, but we cannot let our pride and our ignorance of what's happening outside stop us from being able to take into consideration all of the assets that are there for us to be able to tag on to. It's that simple.
That reminds me, it was actually at the core of what I said originally, but I wasn't as articulate. I think the key is to recognize this is a design problem, not an engineering problem.
Yes.
Most people come in and say, oh, we need to re-engineer our existing grid. The reality is you have to redesign your whole economy, your energy economy. And so it has to be approached as a design problem. And you see developing countries who have no infrastructure, they're building it new, so it is fundamentally a design problem. Right. In the developed world, everybody wants to come and say, how do we migrate from where we are today to where we want to be? It is not a migration. It is a disruptive, I don't want to say revolution, but it's a design problem. And so the help that you need initially and then throughout is a design help backed by engineering help.
Okay, right. So I guess part of the design question then for us, especially here in Hawaii, as we make a lot of investments over the next 5 years. I mean, the next 5 years of investments are going to determine what the entire energy system looks like over the next 20, 30 years. So in the design sense, how do you design for flexibility? How do you design for a system that we don't know what it's going to look like, and we don't really know where technology is going? We have a lot of good guesses, but frankly, we could not have predicted, or we did not predict 8 years ago where we are today. So how do you design for flexibility in that system?
You know, I think nobody has the answer to that particular question in the energy space because, especially in the first world energy space, I think you can look to places like Silicon Valley or whatever, like how would they solve it? And ideas like rapid prototyping, ideas like you're not going to be able to engineer the solution and implement the plan. So we like to say you have to work on the design simultaneously with working on the engineering, get a lot of projects going, all that are aligned with the plan, get a lot of projects going and learn real time from those projects. Some are going to work and are going to be great models for the future. Some are not going to work, but they're small and well thought out. They won't be disastrous. But it's that learning process that'll get you there. I can guarantee it, and we've seen it time and time again, if you design it first and then are dead set on implementing the design, it is not going to work.
Yeah, so I have similar thoughts to Ned, where no one can predict the future, the long-term future, and I'm a planner, and I can say that. But that doesn't mean that planning and trying to predict what will happen in the long term is not important. It's important in that it sets direction, it gives you guidance, so that you can gain confidence in the short-term decisions and actions that you need to take. We can have the best plan for our islands and not meet our goals if we're not able to execute. So I think at the end of the day, we need to have confidence in the short-term actions that we take. I think you can gain, one important way to gain that confidence is by building flexibility in the short-term actions that you take, looking at your long-term plans for directional guidance, and to constantly be looking at how that long-term future could change so that you can make sure along the way all of these short-term decisions you're making are no regret ones.
Can you take that concrete for a minute? Maybe give us an example of making a decision like that provides flexibility in the future?
I think the best example, for the Hawaiian Electric systems, and it was mentioned yesterday, and even the mayor mentioned it just a little while ago. We all know that our future, or we have very, very high confidence that our future is going to require and include a lot of distributed edge devices. So if we have high confidence that that's going to be our future, but we don't know exactly or precisely how much of each and what that specific technology will be, I think a very, very no regrets decision and action we should be taking now is to build a smart grid system, right, in a way where it's adaptive to changes in technology, designed from the very beginning to be able to work with edge devices, distributed generation, distributed storage systems, smart devices, customer appliances, and the like.
Yeah, our startups would agree with you. That's the number one thing they say. We meet it yesterday.
Some real concrete examples. I actually agree with Colton that we need to plan. Okay, we need to come up with general goals that we're trying to achieve, and we need to then figure out how we're going to meet those goals. Now, when you look at all of the telecommunications, when they pulled the cable in, they had no idea the breadth of what the cable industry was going to be able to develop into. 5 years ago, we didn't think that you'd be running your computer system off of the TV. We didn't think that most of the technology that we have on our iPhones was going to exist. These are industries that have proven that once you set the parameters and you start letting private industry experiment, that experimentation can all meld into workable units. Not all of them succeed, but the market will dictate what will succeed and what will not, and how the community will accept or not accept what is there. But you cannot stifle the individuals who are trying to make the changes. Hawaiian Tel did that way back when. They tried to be the only entity, and for a while it worked. But once they were out of the way, and you could see all these feeder companies coming in, there are literally hundreds of companies now that are able and capable of producing a much better product than we had before. The evolution happens every day. In my short lifetime, I've gone from slide rule to not understanding what the fifth graders understand in technology. I thought I had an education, but apparently nowadays fifth graders can work with computers and 3D printers and things we never imagined were going to be possible. But if you build it into the system, the way that we've evolved using the technologies that we have, the communication system, the computer systems, those have no parameters that are fixed, except that we know it's going to change, and we know that we're going to have to change out our systems. We cannot anymore count on buying a computer today and expecting next year that model is going to work with all the new programs.
So how do we plan for that uncertainty? I think that everyone up here agrees that there's going to be a lot of change, there's a lot of uncertainty, but we still have to make decisions. Colton and I took part in an electricity game on Monday.
You have to allow flexibility in the private sector.
Yeah.
You have to allow flexibility. Japan just deregulated the electric industry. Deregulation isn't in and of itself the end all. The entity that you end up with is. But to allow private sector, individuals like people in this room to be able to come up with concepts and to be able to plug them in and to try them out is the only way we're going to get to the point where we need to in being able to exercise all these different concepts and ideas against the public.
At the end of the day, as you plug in all those different pieces, I mean, someone's got to own the system. Someone's got to own the whole.
I'm not 100% sure of that. There's a lot of markets out there where there is no central ownership.
Yes.
It is a community ownership. Internet being the most obvious one people talk about all the time. And when you talk about flexibility, everybody always goes and thinks about the engineering of the grid or whatever. It is not about the engineering of the grid. That will come. No. It's about the regulatory frameworks in which all the organizations can work in. In most of the developed world, most of the United States, utilities just aren't even able to do this. It's not within their regulatory jurisdiction to do any of this, to be flexible. So I believe a lot of them would love to, but it's just not there. So you have to have flexible regulatory frameworks, you have to have flexible political frameworks, you have to have flexible engineering, and then you can create a network that will be able to self-maintain. If you try to do the technical without the regulatory, you're creating something that's fundamentally unstable.
Is there any good examples of self-maintaining networks in the electric space, you think?
Well, so I think you're starting to see some coming out of the developing countries. In the United States, New York is probably the closest to a state that is basically trying to recreate their regulatory framework to allow for more flexibility. Unregulated states like Texas and all have some beginning of that. In the wholesale market, which probably isn't as relevant to Hawaii as it is on the mainland, the wholesale markets that allow for flexibility in the market space, they are game changers in this. And if you look in the United States, in the mainland, we moved from having the RPS drive solar adoption to have corporate purchasing driving solar adoption now. And that's because corporates now have the ability to just say, you heard it from MGM yesterday, I'm not going to deal with my utility anymore. I'm going to solve my own energy future. And that is bringing incredible flexibility to the wholesale market.
Let's see from the online community. Do we have anything from the sidebar? Any questions?
In particular, there's interest in sort of the different models for deploying renewables, and specifically when we've talked a lot about utility scale and distributed assets, whether there's a middle ground around something like community renewables, how promising that might be, or what sort of obstacles could be posed.
So that's, I think, the next step in sort of this.
Why don't we look at the model of what's happened with the telephone company? Right now, we have semi-control over the telephone utility, but we don't really have control over all the industry and all the new products that are coming out, right? We allow all the new products to be able to come into the market and to be able to compete. This is a good example of how the electric utility can be as well, because what we're looking at is not a single source power. We're looking at multiple abilities to put in source. The grid itself does not have to be one simple grid. It can be microgrids. There are many permutations away from the old model that we have right now that actually are in existence and work.
So I'm curious, Colton, so when we hear the telecom electricity parallel a lot, where do you think that holds? Where does it break down?
I don't know if it does break down. I think with Merit giving the telephone industry example and Hawaiian Tel for us locally as example, they faced a lot of competition beginning in the 80s and especially in the 90s from the cellular industry. And I think there are a lot of parallels to the electric industry, not just in Hawaii, but around the country, and internationally, good point, with customer-owned distributed generation. It does not fall under the same regulation that as a business, as an industry, has a different set of rules and regulations for which they have to follow. And so you do have competition within a regulated space where not all of the competitors are subject to that regulation. So I think there's a lot of parallels there. Where I think the analogy will continue is that I think there's some really good examples in the telecom industry where former Bell companies, right, traditional telephone companies have both been allowed and had the capacity and desire to get into businesses, develop technology, and really innovate within the telecom space.
Yeah.
And be successful, but be successful doing something different from what they had been doing, in the 70s or 80s.
If you deregulate the consumer or the end customer market and let them choose, and then you let entrepreneurs respond, there will be markets for residential, there will be markets for community, there will be markets for utility scale, and they will flush themselves out. When you try to control them from the top down, that's when you're making decisions between one versus the other.
So as we're running out of time here, I want to ask you each one closing question, which is, in one word, what do you think is the most important ingredient to getting Hawaii to 100% renewable energy? I guess we'll start back with Ned. We've heard a lot of different things this morning. What do you think what boils it down?
I think it's innovation.
Innovation.
For me, I think the one word would be leadership. Even though we have an agreement on a common goal, we still need a lot of leadership to get us from here to there.
And Colton told my word, leadership.
All right, leadership, and innovation. Leadership, spirit, innovation. Excellent. Well, help me, please join me in thanking our panel this morning for getting us started.